The crack of the leather belt against Lillian Turner's back echoed through the small cabin like thunder rolling across the Montana plains. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, determined not to cry out, not to give her father the satisfaction. At 20 years old, she'd endured his beatings for as long as she could remember, but tonight was different. Tonight, through tear-blurred eyes, she glimpsed a shadow moving across the window, a silhouette on horseback, watching. Worthless girl. Samuel Turner roared, his words slurred from whiskey. Your mother would still be alive if not for you. The belt came down again, and Lillian collapsed to her knees on the rough wooden floor. Outside in the darkness, Kieran Iverson tightened his grip on the reins of his stallion. He'd only meant to ask for directions to the nearest town when he'd approached the isolated cabin, but what he witnessed through that window made his blood run cold. Without a second thought, he dismounted and moved toward the door. The year was 1876, and law was a distant concept in this untamed corner of Montana territory. Justice often came from the barrel of a gun or not at all. Kieran wasn't a lawman, just a cowboy moving cattle north, but he knew the difference between right and wrong. Samuel Turner raised the belt again, but before it could descend, the cabin door burst open. The cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of sage and the imposing figure of a stranger. That's enough, Kieran said, his voice quiet but firm, hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Samuel spun around, eyes wild with rage and liquor. This ain't your business, mister. Get out of my house. Lillian looked up, her golden brown hair falling around her face, one eye already swelling shut. She stared at the stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to burn with a controlled fury. The lady's coming with me, Kieran stated. Not a question, but a declaration. Samuel lunged for the shotgun propped against the wall. Kieran drew faster, his revolver aimed steady. Don't, he warned. For a tense moment, the only sound was the crackle of the dying fire. Then Samuel slumped, the fight going out of him as quickly as it had come. Take her, he spat. Useless mouth to feed anyway. Kieran extended his free hand to Lillian. Can you walk, miss? She nodded, struggling to her feet. Her simple cotton dress was torn at the back, stained with fresh blood. She grabbed a shawl from a hook by the door and wrapped it around her shoulders, hiding the worst of her injuries. You come back here, Lillian, and I'll kill you, her father threatened, but the words held no power now. No, you won't, Kieran replied, his gaze never leaving Samuel. Because if you ever come near her again, I'll be the one coming back, and you don't want that. Outside, the night air was cool against Lillian's heated skin. She trembled, whether from pain or the sudden freedom, she couldn't tell. Kieran helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. I've got a camp set up about a mile from here, he explained, his voice gentler now. We'll tend to your wounds, then figure out what's next. As they rode away, Lillian felt the steady heartbeat of the stranger against her back, his arms secure around her to keep her from falling. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar take root in her chest. Hope. The campfire cast dancing shadows across the small clearing where Kieran had made his temporary home. His bedroll lay near the fire, and his saddle served as a makeshift backrest. His pack horse was hitched to a nearby tree, alongside his main mount. Here, Kieran said, offering Lillian a tin cup of coffee laced with a splash of whiskey. It'll help with the pain. She accepted it gratefully, her hand still shaking slightly. Thank you, Mr. Iverson. Kieran, he corrected. Just Kieran. Lillian nodded, taking a small sip of the strong brew. The whiskey burned a path down her throat, but it warmed her from within. I'm Lillian Turner, she offered, though I suppose you heard that back at the cabin. I did. He rummaged through his saddlebags and produced a small medical kit. I need to see your back, Miss Turner. Those wounds need cleaning. Color rose to her cheeks, but she nodded. Modesty seemed a small concern compared to the risk of infection. She turned away from him and carefully lowered her shawl, keeping the front of her torn dress pressed to her chest. Kieran worked in silence, cleaning each welt with water he'd heated over the fire, then applying a salve that smelled of herbs and pine. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man with such calloused hands. "How long?" he asked simply. Lillian knew what he meant. "As long as I can remember." "It got worse after my mother died of fever 5 years ago. He blames me for not being able to save her." She winced as the cloth touched a particularly deep cut. "He wasn't always like this. The drink changed him." Kieran nodded, continuing his ministrations. "My father was the same way. Whiskey made him mean." "Is that why you left home?" A sad smile crossed his face. "Left when I was 16. Been working cattle drives ever since. Currently heading north with a herd camped about 5 miles from here. I was scouting ahead when I came across your cabin." When he finished, he offered her one of his clean shirts to wear. It was far too large, but it was whole and didn't press against her injuries. While she changed behind a nearby bush, he prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky. "What will you do now?" he asked when she returned, settling carefully on a blanket he'd laid out for her. Lillian stared into the fire. It was a question she'd asked herself 1,000 times, but never with the actual freedom to act on it. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have an aunt in Denver, but—" She trailed off. The truth was, she had nowhere to go and no money to get there. "The cattle drive I'm with is heading to Cheyenne," Kieran offered. "You'd be welcome to travel with us. The trail boss is a good man. Once we reach town, you could find work or passage to Denver." "Why are you helping me?" Lillian asked, studying his face in the firelight. He wasn't classically handsome, but his features were strong, his jawline defined beneath a few days' growth of beard. His eyes, she realized now, were a deep green. Kieran poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "Because someone should have helped my mother," he said finally. "And no one did." In the morning, Lillian's body ached, but a night of untroubled sleep had done wonders for her spirit. She watched as Kieran packed up the camp with practiced efficiency. "The herd will be moving soon," he explained. "We need to catch up." Riding behind Kieran, her arms tentatively wrapped around his waist, Lillian felt both terrified and exhilarated. The vastness of the Montana landscape spread out before them, rolling plains dotted with sagebrush, distant mountains touched with the first hint of snow. Freedom, she realized, was both beautiful and frightening. They reached the cattle drive as the herd was beginning to move. Nearly 2,000 head of cattle stretched across the plain, guided by a dozen cowboys. Dust rose in clouds as hooves churned the earth. A gray-haired man with a weathered face rode out to meet them. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Lillian. "Mr. Ross," Kieran greeted the trail boss. "This is Miss Lillian Turner. She's in need of safe passage to Cheyenne." The older man studied Lillian for a moment, taking in her bruised face and the too large shirt she wore. Understanding flickered in his eyes. "We don't usually take on passengers, Miss Turner, especially not women." "I can cook," Lillian offered quickly. "And so, I won't be a burden." Ross's stern expression softened slightly. "Our cook could use some help, I suppose. Camp's getting set up about 10 miles ahead. You can ride in the chuck wagon once we catch up to it." "Thank you, sir." As Ross rode away, Kieran squeezed her hand briefly. "He's fair. You'll be safe with the outfit." Life on the cattle drive was unlike anything Lillian had ever experienced. She rose before dawn each day to help the cook, an older man named Davis who grumbled constantly, but taught her how to prepare meals for 15 hungry cowboys over an open fire. The work was hard, but it was honest, and no one raised a hand to her. The cowboys treated her with a kind of awkward respect, tipping their hats when they approached the chuck wagon and watching their language in her presence. All except Kieran, who spoke to her the same way he had since the night he'd rescued her, directly and without pretense. In the evenings, after the dishes were washed and put away, he would often sit with her by the fire, telling stories of the places he'd been. California, with its endless sunshine, the rugged mountains of Colorado, the vast plains of Texas. Lillian listened, entranced not just by the tales but by the man telling them. "Have you ever thought of settling down?" she asked one evening, 2 weeks into their journey. Kieran looked up at the stars, countless and brilliant in the clear night sky. "Sometimes," he admitted. "A small ranch somewhere, nothing fancy, just a place to call my own." He glanced at her, a half smile on his lips. "What about you? What does Lillian Turner dream about?" She considered the question. "A home," she said finally. "Not like the one I had. A real home with laughter instead of shouting, children who aren't afraid." "You'll have that someday," he said with such certainty that she almost believed him. The next day, disaster struck. A sudden thunderstorm spooked the herd, and despite the cowboys' best efforts, the cattle stampeded. Lillian watched in horror from the relative safety of the chuck wagon as men fought to control the panicking animals. Through the chaos and dust, she saw Kieran's horse go down, throwing him into the path of the stampede. Without thinking, she grabbed the rifle kept under the wagon seat and fired several shots into the air, diverting the lead steers just enough for Kieran to roll to safety. That night, as Davis tended to Kieran's injuries, bruised ribs, and a dislocated shoulder, the cowboy looked up at Lillian with new respect. "You saved my life today." She shrugged, embarrassed by the attention. "You saved mine first." 2 days later, they crossed into Wyoming territory. The landscape changed subtly, the hills more pronounced, the grass a different shade of green. They made camp near a small creek, and after dinner, Kieran invited Lillian to walk with him. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a small rise overlooking the camp. "You're back healing well?" Kieran asked, his tone casual but his eyes concerned. Lillian nodded. "Almost completely. Davis's salve works wonders." "Good." He hesitated, then continued. "We'll reach Cheyenne in about 10 days. Have you decided what you'll do then?" The question hung in the air between them. In truth, Lillian had been avoiding thinking about it. The cattle drive had become a kind of suspended reality, neither her past life nor whatever uncertain future awaited her. "I thought I might try to find work there," she said carefully. "Save enough to eventually reach Denver." Kieran nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's sensible." "What will you do?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He would find another herd, another trail. That was his life. "I've been thinking about that small ranch I mentioned," he said, surprising her. "There's good land available in Wyoming. The territory's growing fast." Hope fluttered in Lillian's chest, but she tamped it down. "It sounds wonderful," she said, meaning it. Kieran turned to face her fully then, his green eyes serious in the fading light. "Lillian," he began, then stopped. He wasn't a man who struggled with words, but he seemed to now. "I know we haven't known each other long, but a shout from the camp interrupted him. Rider coming in." They hurried back to find a lone horseman speaking urgently with Ross. As they approached, Lillian felt her blood run cold. The rider was Tom Wilkins, their nearest neighbor from Montana. "There she is," Wilkins exclaimed, pointing at Lillian. "Samuel Turner's been looking everywhere for his daughter. Says she was kidnapped by one of your men." Ross looked from Wilkins to Lillian, his expression grave. "Is that true, Miss Turner?" Before she could answer, Kieran stepped forward. "No, sir, it's not." Miss Turner came willingly to escape her father's abuse. I witnessed it myself." "That's so?" Ross asked Lillian directly. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice stronger than she felt. "My father nearly beat me to death. Mr. Iverson saved my life." Wilkins spat on the ground. "Samuel's offering $50 for her return. Says she stole family heirlooms." "That's a lie," Lillian said, anger overcoming her fear. "I took nothing but the clothes on my back." Ross studied her for a long moment, then turned to Wilkins. "You tell Samuel Turner that Miss Lillian is under the protection of this outfit now. He comes looking for trouble, he'll find more than he bargained for." Wilkins glared but didn't argue further. He knew better than to challenge 15 armed cowboys. With a final venomous look at Lillian, he rode away. That night, Lillian couldn't sleep. The encounter had brought her past crashing back into her present. She slipped out of the small tent she shared with the cook's supplies and walked to the edge of camp, where the night guard kept watch over the herd. Kieran found her there, staring at the stars. Without a word, he draped his coat over her shoulders. "He won't stop," she said softly. "It's not about me, it's about control. He can't stand that I got away." "He won't find you in Cheyenne," Kieran assured her. "It's a big town, getting bigger every day with the railroad." Lillian turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "What were you going to say earlier?" Before Wilkins arrived, Kieran took a deep breath. "I was going to ask if you might consider staying with me, not as a hired hand or a passenger, but as—" He trailed off, then gathered his courage. "As my wife." "I know it's sudden, and I'd understand if—" Lillian pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "Yes," she whispered. His eyes widened. "Yes," she nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, mindful of her still healing injuries. When they parted, both were breathless. "I don't have much to offer," Kieran warned. "Just my name and whatever future we build together." "That's more than enough," Lillian assured him. "That's everything." They were married in Cheyenne a week after arriving. A simple ceremony performed by a justice of the peace with Ross and Davis as witnesses. Kieran used his savings to put a down payment on a small homestead 30 miles outside of town, 160 acres of good grazing land, with a modest cabin and a creek running through the property. The cabin needed work. The roof leaked in 3 places, and the single window was cracked, but to Lillian, it was paradise. For the first time in her life, she had a home that was truly hers, shared with a man who treated her with kindness and respect. Their first year was hard, as first years often are. They started with just 10 head of cattle and 2 horses. The winter was brutal, with snowdrifts higher than the cabin's door. They survived on preserved food and whatever game Kieran could hunt when the weather allowed, but they were happy. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, planning their future. Kieran taught Lillian to read better, using the few books he owned. She taught him to make bread that didn't resemble a brick. Spring brought new life to the land and news that changed their lives forever. Lillian was expecting a child. The prospect terrified and delighted her in equal measure. "What if I'm like him?" she whispered one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if the anger is in my blood?" Kieran pulled her close. "You're nothing like him," he said fiercely. "You're strong and kind and good. Our child will know only love." As summer turned to fall, their small herd grew, and so did Lillian. The baby was due in early winter, and they prepared as best they could. Kieran built a cradle from pine boards, and Lillian sewed tiny garments from fabric purchased on their infrequent trips to town. It was during one such trip, as November winds began to blow cold across the plains, that Lillian's past caught up with her. They were loading supplies into their wagon when she saw him, Samuel Turner, older and more haggard than she remembered, stumbling out of a saloon. She froze, the package of sugar in her hand suddenly unbearably heavy. Kieran followed her gaze and immediately stepped in front of her, shielding her from view. "Get in the wagon," he said quietly. "Now." But it was too late. Samuel had seen them. His bloodshot eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with hatred. "You!" he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at Lillian. "Ungrateful wretch!" People on the street stopped to stare. Kieran's hand moved to his gun. "Don't," Lillian whispered, placing her hand on his arm. "Not here." Samuel staggered toward them, reeking of whiskey and neglect. "Stole my daughter," he slurred, addressing the growing crowd of onlookers. "This man took my only child." "Your only child." Lillian stepped around Kieran, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Her condition was obvious now, her rounded belly pushing against her coat. "The one you beat until her back bled. The one you blamed for her mother's death," Samuel faltered, not expecting this direct challenge. The crowd's sympathetic murmurs shifted. The sheriff, attracted by the commotion, approached. "What's the trouble here?" Before Samuel could speak, an elderly woman pushed forward. "I know this man," she declared. "Samuel Turner. His wife was my cousin. He drove her to an early grave with his cruelty, and from the looks of his daughter, he didn't treat her any better." Samuel lunged suddenly, reaching for Lillian. Kieran moved faster, his fist connecting with Samuel's jaw. The older man crumpled to the ground. "That's enough," the sheriff barked, placing himself between the men. He looked from Samuel's prone form to Kieran and Lillian. "You folks want to press charges." Lillian looked down at her father, pathetic, broken by drink and hatred, and felt nothing but pity. "No," she said softly. "We just want to go home." The sheriff nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then I suggest you do that. I'll handle him." As they drove away, Lillian leaned against Kieran's solid presence, exhausted but relieved. "Do you think he'll come after us again?" Kieran wrapped an arm around her. "I don't know, but if he does, we'll face him together." They never saw Samuel Turner again. They learned later that he'd been arrested that same day for starting a brawl in another saloon, and had died in jail of liver failure before his sentence was complete. Lillian mourned not for the man he was, but for the father he might have been. Their daughter was born on the first snow of winter, a healthy, strong-lunged girl they named Hope. As Lillian held her newborn child, Kieran beside her with wonder in his eyes, she marveled at how far she had come from that night of terror in Montana. "She has your eyes," Kieran whispered, touching the baby's cheek gently. "And your stubbornness," Lillian replied, smiling as the infant gripped her finger with surprising strength. 5 years passed, bringing prosperity and 2 more children, a boy named Daniel and another girl they called Emma. The homestead grew into a successful small ranch. They added a proper barn and expanded the cabin to accommodate their growing family. On a warm summer evening, as the children played in the yard and the sun set over land that was truly theirs, Kieran found Lillian standing on the porch, watching their eldest daughter teaching her younger siblings how to catch fireflies. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Lillian leaned into him, thinking of the journey that had brought her here from a cabin of fear to a home filled with laughter. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. Hope ran up to them then, her small hands cupped around a glowing firefly. "Look, Mama, I caught one." Lillian knelt down, marveling at the tiny light pulsing in her daughter's gentle hands. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Just remember to let it go. Even the smallest creatures deserve their freedom." As Hope released the firefly and it spiraled upward into the darkening sky, Lillian felt Kieran's hand squeeze her shoulder. No words were needed between them. They both understood the value of what they'd built, not just a ranch or a family, but a sanctuary where love, not fear, ruled. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Lillian and Kieran sat on the porch swing, listening to the chorus of crickets and distant coyotes. "I received a letter from Ross today," Kieran said. "He's retiring from trail driving, thinking of settling near Laramie." "We should invite him to visit," Lillian suggested. "The children would love his stories." Kieran nodded, his thumb tracing lazy circles on her hand. "I never properly thanked him, you know. If he hadn't let you join that drive, we might never have found each other," Lillian finished the thought. She looked up at the same stars that had witnessed their journey from the beginning. "Do you ever wonder about all the little moments that had to happen exactly as they did to bring us here? Like me getting lost and stumbling across your cabin that night," she nodded, "or me having the courage to leave with you." Kieran was quiet for a moment, contemplating. "I don't believe it was chance," he said finally. "Some things are meant to be, no matter how unlikely they seem." Lillian thought of the frightened young woman she'd been, certain her life would never be more than pain and fear. How wrong she had been. How wonderfully, beautifully wrong. "I love you, Kieran Iverson," she said simply. "And I love you, Lillian Iverson," he replied, sealing the words with a kiss as gentle and promising as their first. Inside the house, hope stirred in her sleep, dreaming peaceful dreams untroubled by fear or memory of cruelty. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through tall grass, carrying the scent of sage and freedom across land that would nurture generations to come. And under the vast canopy of stars, a cowboy and the woman he'd saved held each other close, their love a testament to the healing power of kindness and the unexpected joy that can rise from the darkest shadows.